Okay, good.
So, welcome. Girls, would you like to share with the rest of us? I hope you bought enough to go around. Anyway, welcome. So in terms of orienting to your experience, to your life, to reality, the true perspective is actuality. No surprise. So if you want to, figure out what's going on, what the perspective of things is in terms of dealing with things, look and see what they actually constitute in your present experience. Simple, direct, short and sweet. So for example, someone is very upset about something, they're crying and they're saying, oh my God, this horrible thing happened. So what is the actuality in your experience? Well, it's the presence of visual information. It's the presence of sound, you're hearing the sound. I'm sorry?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I will speak up, sorry. So what is the actuality of that? You can just sort of ignore all that, just, oh, someone's freaked out, there must be something to freak out about. Or you can look at what is the actuality in terms of your experiential field at that time. Well, you're seeing light, you're seeing patterns of movement in light, you're hearing sound, you're hearing words maybe. The words may be conveying information which you parse as thoughts. The thoughts may be sparking associations, which may be projected as fantasies of imagination that may be happening. And so all of that may be happening. That's the reality of the situation. And that puts it in perspective in terms of just jumping to the conclusion that something, like particularly in terms of information that people say or conveying emotion to, that it actually necessarily means anything. What it means is what it actually is in your experience.
So it may not have to have a meaning, it's simply what is.
No, you look at what's happening, and if there's meaning, you look at what that consists of. Is it thought? I mean, whatever. I mean, you just look at the particular example. Just see what's actually there. What is meaning?
That's why I was confused when you said, see what meaning it has. I would have to attribute a meaning to it.
Well, see what is there.
It's actually happening.
Yes, see what is actually happening. Pretty simple and obvious.
I got thrown when you said meaning.
It's a reality check in terms of seeing what experiential events actually consist of, especially in terms of relating with other people, because there can seem to be so much, there can be all kinds of seemingly potent content and emotionality and manipulative stances and things like that, and it diffuses them as being what they aren't if you see what they are, and what they are, of course, is whatever they actually happen to be in your experience.
So is that the meaning itself is a kind of texture?
I don't know, what does meaning mean?
Right.
I mean, we have this word meaning, it's a pretty vague word. What specifically does it refer to? Does it refer to emotional tenor? Does it refer to logical content? It's sort of a sloppy catch-all garbage bucket of a concept that, you can look and see, what does meaning mean? What do you mean by meaning? Is meaning implication in terms of reaction? A stop sign means if I drive through this intersection, I may be more at risk than if I stop first and then drive through the intersection, for example. So in that case, the meaning is a recommendation of a certain mode of activity, so on and so forth.
But using your example of somebody who's crying or yelling or whatever, I'd be more inclined to not want to attribute any meaning to it and just, as you said, oh, well, what's it?
No, it's not about attributing meaning. You see what there is. Attributing is creating, is fantasizing. Anyway, that's very abstract. It's not important.
So there are two similar scenarios. I'm walking down the street with somebody who I don't know. Whatever. Besides, I am the Antichrist. Besides, light up what a horrible thing I am in the world. And it's easy for me to look to accept that as wow, a light shade, because I have no expectation. Person. But if my wife, I have a future invested in this mirage that is now turning into something I didn't expect. And all meaning.
But that future investment is a projection in your imagination, is a thought, and so on and so forth. And if you look at the projection in the imagination and the thought, you can be certain that they will deviate from actuality to the extent that all expectation and all thought always deviates from event.
In fact, I'm responding to what's not happening. Or
Yeah, if you respond to what is happening, you'll probably be much more effective than if you respond to what's not happening. If you add your own fantasy to the mix, you're probably just going to muddy it up.
which goes back to what you wrote about in the first. There's a flow. The flow is smoother.
Yeah. You know, adding complexity, adding turbulence is generally not an aid to efficiency or efficient functioning or efficient orientation if you don't want to look at it in terms of function. I mean, ultimately, what we're dealing with here is all about orientation. You know, how do you orient to your experience? How do you orient to what is here? If there's a one-to-one orientation to what is actually here, then that is enlightenment, that's realization. If there's not a one-to-one orientation, if what's here is the way it is, but there's a turbulence of over complexifying it by orienting to, say, for example, imagination as if it was actuality, as if it was event, other than the event of imagination and so on and so forth, then that muddies the water and confuses things. There's still nothing present in the actuality of your experience, but you may think that you may be thinking and acting and oriented to that actuality as if it was different than it actually is. So it's a matter of orienting to actuality as it actually is. It's just a matter of, you know, one-to-one relationship. So another topic, you're at this retreat. It's been going on for a couple of days now. What's up with that? What's it doing, if anything? What's your reaction to it? What's your orientation to this?
As I said earlier today, it was utterly, totally, completely normal. And 99% of what you say makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't stick. And I can't find a problem. That's great.
Nice. Do you feel value in this approach? Do you feel any value in it at all, other than just, I'm here, it's a nice place and everything's hunky-dory? Nice way to pass the time.
Well, I have a story of past experiences when I'm here. This is my third time here. And there's a sense of just, I guess, a little lighter, a little happier. It's emotional, as you might say. There must be value, because if you ask me today, this is just fiction, but if I want to come back next year, I'd say yeah. So there must be value, but it's hard for me to put my finger on what that value is. Really.
Well, that's the index of value.
I'm pretty clear usually on how I spend my time. I wouldn't be here if there wasn't value. And any more than understanding what you're saying, could I put my finger on why I think this is valuable?
One of the aspects of this is value inheres in actuality, and of course, as we've talked about from many different angles, actuality is, let's say, at best challenging, if not impossible, to pin down and resolve. This is exactly what it is. So, actuality is where the value lies. And so if you can specify the value, your problem is probably a fantasy or at least an intermediary that refers to some deeper actuality that you are unable to specify. So value is self-verifying. Value is felt because it feels valuable. And discovering that is, of course, discovering the true value. Reality is not valuable because of some logical argument or some, position that can be stated. Reality is valuable because it is valuable. It's palpably valuable. It's meaningful. It's juicy. It's beautiful. It's vital. It's interesting. It's fascinating. It's luscious. It's delicious. And if that's not valuable, then what is?
In a way, I second what you're saying. The whole realm of being conscious and understanding, the realm of understanding, just has become so much less important. It's sort of meaningless, really. Just uninteresting. And so what is there? It's a realm, if you will, of which I have no way to describe or even experience in a way. It just is. It is this, as it is. And there's just a wonder to that, which I have no way of knowing about. Maybe should know.
Sure. That's a very succinct indication of value, I think.
Is a shift in perspective valuable? It's not like, because
You tell me if it's valuable.
well, I feel like I experienced some shifts in perspectives where I hadn't thought of, or I had a sort of fixed idea of thinking before, and like the thinking opens up a bit. And then, but there's also like I've been seeing Northern California, and you talk about noticing that stuff, and I feel like I get it more. I feel like I appreciate it and feel the textures of things more.
A lot of times when I, come to talks, do talks, I've always sort of come as I'm trying to work out some problem, usually myself as well. And the value for me is, and I use the analogy of surfing, but it's not that much of an analogy. It feels pretty, I feel like a pretty concrete way of describing it. And surfing. And I feel like, rather than teaching how to surf, it's more like we are surfing. Point it out, and it feels like it's just, I don't know how to describe it. It feels like surfing, more of a sense of beauty or something. My definition of what alive is, I think, on this retreat.
Interesting.
Yeah, alive used to mean that it's living, breathing, and now it's more happening, just happening.
Yeah, sure.
Occurrence.
Yeah. Yeah. And happening is the actuality of your experience. So it's very participatory, it's very intimate, it's very engaged, just intrinsically.
I think I was impacted in a way that I'm not entirely comfortable with by last night's nihilistic direction. Everything was like got bigger and more dispersed, and like it just felt like nothing could solidly bump up against anything else. And so I'm thinking about, like, I experience myself as having a body, and that it has the sense of solidity, and it follows certain rules, stuff I've learned in studying medicine or whatever. If I walk off a curb wrong, I break bones, and so, so there's like that experience, and then there's this way of looking at things that makes it all, it doesn't make it disappear, it just kind of keeps coming back to like this heaviness. I don't know, that's just kind of how it's feeling. I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to ask. I guess maybe like, how do you deal with like embodiment, matter, and stuff like that?
Well, the way to deal with it is the same way you deal with anything. See what it is. What is embodiment? When you say embodiment, what are you referring to?
The sense that I have the body. And
Well, experience of seeing. I mean, it's a gestalt of a whole bunch of complex elements that are not necessarily intimately related. There's, you see your body, so that's information in the field of vision. You could say you feel your body, so that's information in the sense of touch. You have ideas of your body, right? So that's concepts. You may have fantasies of your body that have emotionality attached, like little movies you play in your own conscious about your body image or whatever, I don't know what. And so each of these elements exists, obviously not completely independently, but they aren't necessarily all attached as one thing. They come and go independently. You close your eyes and the vision of your body disappears, but the sensation doesn't disappear, let's say. Or you go to sleep and the sensation of the vision disappears, but the concept of the fantasies don't necessarily disappear. You might have dreams about your body or a projection of your body that has nothing to do with anything you're actually seeing or anything you're actually feeling sensorially in real time, for example. So there's all of these different elements, sort of a gestalt, like a constellation that is being called embodiment. And if there's a heaviness, that implies, a sense of heaviness, like a perception of gravitation, or there may be emotional associations or feelings of stuckness, or I don't know what. So the point is there can be a lot of complex elements that, it's kind of what I started talking about tonight, but to see to see how to orient with anything, see what it actually is in the actuality of the experience, see what the experience of it is. Just as an example of looking at the issue.
so this morning we were saying that there's the materialist perspective of like being all atoms vibrating or whatever, and then yet there's something else. And so I guess like when I think of my embodiment, it's kind of like this, I guess gestalt is a good word, it's like this thing, it's like I wake up and there's a feeling of solidity, like the heaviness which sometimes feels gravitational and sometimes feels emotional. But it's kind of like, most of the time I don't have to think about it, right? I just like get up and walk and go to the bathroom and,
Generally, I would say for most people, certainly in my experience, the body's usually pretty transparent. It's, it may be appearing in experience as a vehicle for enacting certain things. Like if I'm walking somewhere, then there's a certain degree of awareness of the body walking and sorts of sensation and vision and so on. But by and large, I'm focusing on the task I'm doing or whatever, which is much more present, let's say, in terms of my focus and attention or what have you.
I think the first retreat I went to with you, I was like, well, how do you do your life? Because like it's like it kind of feels like as you're talking, everything gets like pulled apart, and then you said something about, well, you got your functionality. And is functionality just something that arises miraculously too?
Well, functionality is a concept. The fact is that everything happens unstoppably. And that's how you do your life, the same way you always have. Now you're scratching your arm. How are you scratching your arm? It just happens.
Right.
How do I do this? How do I scratch my arm? Everything's just falling apart. Yeah. You do it by scratching.
Right.
It's a direct energy participation, you can call it.
Right.
You don't need to make sense of it to do it. But by looking at it, you can make more sense of it in terms of deconstructing your misunderstandings. Which in terms of what we talked about earlier, all they can add is inefficiency and murkiness to your whole perspective. Misunderstandings aren't bad, but they aren't really contributing a whole lot of useful information, right?
I guess sometimes when I mean, obviously we're on retreat, so it's okay, but it's like, you start like, well, look at this, look like somebody's having a fit in front of you, and they're upset with you. Like, let's say, you know, I'm dealing with a patient and they're upset with something that I said that they take it the wrong way, and they're upset with you, and I suppose there's some value in just like kind of, okay, what's going on here, you know? But things often move a lot faster than that.
Sure. But the habit of seeing it more clearly can become more and more instantaneous if you're trained in it.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
In other words, you don't need to rely on process of, wait a minute, hold the phone, let me look at this, let me deconstruct and pull it apart, have to do all this sequential stuff, which may seem to be necessary when you first play with this kind of a mode.
right.
You know, when you sort of do a reality check of, well, I'm used to approaching this in this way. What's really going on here?
Right.
You know, was what I'm doing a one-to-one simple correlation, or am I adding some unnecessary gibberish to the mix that isn't actually helping anything out at all?
I guess that's like how you get more mastery in whatever you're doing.
Yes. You know, you play with it, and eventually it just becomes second nature.
I guess like when you're in the place where you're kind of learning, you're pulling it apart so you can learn how to do it at a different level, it's very uncomfortable.
It can be, sure, it certainly can be. Well, you're a therapist, so therapy can be uncomfortable, but essentially, I mean, therapy is more or less that, in one degree or another, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, the point of it is not the thing itself. The point of it is the development of more clarity, the development of more, you know, direct engagement or something, I suppose.
I guess there's a lot of things that muddy everything for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, there may be, you know, there may be. I mean, you know, in just pragmatic terms, the whole, you know, as I put in the paper that I handed out the first night, the whole issue with spirituality is clarity. You know, calling a spade a spade. You know, looking and seeing what's actually here, and seeing what is actually. When this seeing sees what it actually is, seeing what it's actually seeing, then that is what, you know, the so-called realization, enlightenment, self-realization, all this is. You know, it's not.
We're an intermediary. So.
Yeah, there's no unnecessary garbage in the system. It's like debugging software or something, I suppose. I mean, I don't know either. I'm just you know, speculating. I mean, typically we've been fed a bill of goods. We've been miseducated about what we are and what's going on here, and so it's a whole lot of garbage has been fed into our idea of what's happening, what we are, what's going on, which also provokes a lot of emotional reactivity, and I mean, just a whole you know, shitstorm of complexity that may not be necessary, and it may be possible to see what's actually going on here and recognize it, which basically devalues all of the extra stuff. The noise in the system is just noise, so who gives a shit? It's not something you take into account. Maybe.
We can't, you know, I don't think you can go back to being the way you were before you developed an ego, but I guess like you can get to something else that's a different level of not interpreting in the way you've been socialized to interpret everything.
Sure. Nothing, you know, what I have found is nothing is intrinsically a problem. Ego is not a problem. Personality mechanisms and even complexities are not a problem. It's giving them disproportional importance or relevance that's the problem, and that's done through misunderstanding. You know, and some spiritual approaches philosophically, it's, you know, the whole thing is, you know, ego loss or somehow canceling the ego or discovering selflessness and so on and so forth. Well, the ego, what's interesting about that, the personality and personality, you know, mechanisms and so on, is what they are. And when you see what they are, you're free of them. Because they aren't what you think they are. It's what you think they are erroneously that's the problem.
Yeah, I think
Self-importance is not ego. Ego is a sense of self. Self-importance is a fantasy that there's some implication to a sense of self that in actuality doesn't exist. And you can discover that it doesn't exist and that self-importance grows. But if you don't need to negate ego, you don't need to negate these personality mechanisms. You just discover their actual nature, which is just, you know, the way energy works, the way energy flows. And it has no importance in itself, but at all.
that's actually one of the reasons I was attracted to you as a teacher is because you know, I didn't have, you know, the whole idea of like not having this ego just didn't click for me. It's like, how does that work? You know? It just kind of seemed unnecessary, and yet that's what I was mostly hearing, you know.
Well, I mean, what is present is present. Personality is present, but personality is not all that's present, and it's certainly not even the lion's share of what's present. You know, your experiential field is full of qualities and information, let's say. And what you might classify as personality or self-image and all this stuff is really fairly small subsystems in this vastness. And you're all of it equally. So the personality doesn't necessarily have any particular importance. It's just a small subsystem. It's like your hand, you know, it's a small subsystem. It's there, but, you know, it's not really the whole show. It's not like, oh, my hand, everything, you know, it really matters, my hand is so important, it's so urgent, you know. It's like,
I've seen people like that,
but that's an example, you know, you can blow anything out of proportion and all of a sudden you have all this self-importance or hand importance or whatever importance, and it's all just about a magnified disproportionality, which is easily correctable by simply seeing the actual proportion by a reality check like I was talking about at the beginning of this evening. Look and see what it actually is in your experience. So your personality, you know, really matters. You know, I'm really self-obsessed and narcissistic, and you know, Peter Brown, woe is me, you know, wonderful me, blah blah blah, soap opera, soap opera. It's like, okay, cool. Well, what is that in my experiential field? And I look at my experiential field and take inventory, and the personality turns out to be this relatively small little subsystem over here, you know, that it does what it does. It has its nature and is, you know, responsive in whatever causal chain it seems to be responsive in and so on. But it turns out that it's actually not all that urgent or important or relevant. And even its sense of being urgent and important and relevant is not particularly urgent, important, and irrelevant. So you don't even need to stop the narcissism, because even the narcissism is still a small event in the vast experiential field. You know? It's a matter of seeing the actual perspective. There is an actual perspective. Perspective is not necessarily totally flexible or imaginary. It can seem to be because of the strange aspects of, you know, focus of attention and so on. But if you actually take an inventory of the experiential field, you discover the true perspective.
it seems like some aspects are noisy. So
Yeah, they are, absolutely. There's a lot of sloppiness, but that's just the nature of the energy. You know, it's like clouds dissipate sunlight and make rainbows. Not a problem, just a fact. Sunlight is just sunlight. It's very clear and direct and straight. But if sunlight goes through a cloud, and all of a sudden you have rainbows and shadows and all this complexity, which you could say, oh, well, that's noise. It's distorting the sunlight. You know, it's a big problem. It's not a problem. It's just the nature of the energy event. It happens to be like that objectively. So that's part of the perspective. And then likewise, certain energy events, whatever, particular ones may be analogous. And it's okay, that's just how it is. Diffusion, things becoming diffused, perhaps by interaction with other things, apparently, can be an aspect of energy systems. But it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a fact. It's like if your eyesight is bad, the world looks blurry. And that's not necessarily a problem, it's a fact. And if you want to correct it, you can correct it, that's cool. But if you can't correct it, then that's that. And it's all just fact. It's all just cut and dried. Well, that's how it is.
So, Peter, you said maybe a little while ago that realization might be just seeing things as they are.
Yeah, sure. That's one way to put it.
Because I sometimes ask myself, well, what am I seeing is not the way it is? It seems that most of the time, I'm not seeing those are flowers. I don't think that works for the CIA or something further. Sometimes you have thoughts about that.
Sure, of course. And that's part of seeing how it is. The presence of thought, the presence of the apparent information and content of thought is, if that is, then that is. And you see it, and then you're saying what it is.
So, it seems that most of the time I am seeing things the way they are.
Right. You're in that case, you're a real being, you're a clear thinker.
But I wouldn't call myself a thinker.
Okay. Well, why would you not? What indicators or what's up with that in any sense? What occurs to you along those lines?
That's a good question. Maybe I'm just uncomfortable with that label.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Certain implications.
Sure, that's fine. The label is not important, and that's another issue. So being uncomfortable with the label shows that there's some kind of an emotional, in terms of a reality check of the actuality of experience, that shows an emotional association with certain concepts and so on that may be more complexity, whatever the kind of whole gestalt of the thing is for you.
Because sometimes it seems like I'm looking for a problem and not finding it. It just seems like a good problem to have, I guess.
Yeah. But people should be so lucky. My big problem is I can't find any problem. It's terrible.
But that's something that happens when you get irritated or something else. I guess that there's a problem. So maybe I'll grab onto that. But again, it's just happening. It's like it doesn't really seem to ask to. Big deal.
Sure. It's really, in a sense that you could say, in terms of the enlightenment issue, it's what it is the ultimate code. Is this it? Why do I think it either is or isn't? And what's really there, and so on. I would say that, and this isn't particularly precise, but I would say that the sort of feeling tone of one-to-one recognition, one-to-one seeing, is a completeness, a wholeness, an exclusivity. And I realize those are kind of vague notions. I couldn't specify exactly what I mean by that. There's there's a sense of completeness, of wholeness, of this is this, and that is inclusive. Nothing is omitted, and everything whatsoever is this. This is doing that. Whatever, anything that's a that, this is doing that, and that is actually this. And that's it's a palpable sense. And again, it's not an abstraction. It's simply an observation that that is the case, and it's self-verifying. It's a self-verifying, feeling and certainty that that is the case. But I realize that's kind of vague. But it's the nature of the beast is, when it gets down to trying to specify exactly what this is and exactly how it is that, obviously that's a conundrum. It is what it is, and it is that the way that it is that. And every book ever written is its version of an elaboration.
Those are such great questions. Well, I assume that everybody will here to or something about what is it? What's it supposed to? It's like I have an idea what it's supposed to look like, but how would I? I mean, it's sort of or the signpost or the arrow, am I going to know it and see it?
Yeah,
I mean, it's really fascinating.
they're great questions, and check it out. Look at it, and where you look at first is in this actuality, in the actuality of your experience, and that's the whole point. Is look at the actuality of your experience, and it will show you what it is.
I just think it's funny that I have an idea about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, but having an idea about it will be present in your own experience, and so again, that pulls you right back to the evidentiary source itself, which is self-correcting ultimately. The more you check out what is actual, the more clearly you recognize what it is, because it is what it is. And so it verifies what it is, and it does not reinforce or verify what it isn't, you might say. I mean, this shows you what it is, and it's subtle because you can expect it to be something that's erroneous, and you can seem to see it. But that's part of the nature of what it is. The way it is such that can occur. So it's a peculiar curved mirror. It's not a simple mirror. But you can recognize that it is that way. It's clear that it is that. And ultimately that clarity communicates itself because it's not hidden, it's right here. The evidence for what this is being clearly displayed all the time. And the more often you engage with it, the more it's self-correcting in steering you towards a more accurate one-to-one knowing of it, let's say. Let's say minimizing misinterpretation or rendering misinterpretation irrelevant.
I think I have a kind of a nomenclature question. I don't know if you've always used it. So there's my experience, and then there's this experience, which I don't know if you're using it the same way other people might use consciousness or God or something. I mean, it seems like there's like two kinds of experience that we're talking about.
What's the demarcation between them?
I don't know.
Is there a demarcation between them? Is there a this and a that? How can you know that that is a that and not a this? We'll check it out.
I mean, you talk about, like, when Nancy was asking about experience, and you were talking about the cup, and then the cup was in experience, and it like just arose, and it's like, and it's like, I'm not creating it, and yet it's in my experience, so something is creating it.
Right, something's
Which I
creating
think
it.
is a different experience than my experience, although.
Well,
I've
but in what
experienced
sense is it a different experience in your
I don't
experience?
know.
Look at
It's like
that,
it's all muddled.
look at it closely.
Yeah.
Look at it closely, look at the way in which it seems to be muddled. I mean, part of the issue is a vast portion of experience is extrasensory. You know, the sense fields and the mind as conscious mind, let's say, analytical mind or you know, pseudo-rational mind, are relatively small systems in a vast, open-ended, unlimited actuality of the experiential field. And most of that is not sensory. So that's there too. What's that? I mean, we can't even think about that or talk about that because it has no, you know, sensory reference, and most of our language is oriented towards a sensory reference, or maybe once or twice removed from a sensory reference.
Well, how do we know there's a vast thing?
Look and see. Look and see. Look at your experience. Look at what is present in your experience. Look at what qualities. Find something in your experience that is not a sense, that is not being sensed, but is actual. It's an experiential quality, some subtle vibe or some subtle flavor. I don't know. You know, you look for yourself. You know, when you're in deep sleep, what are you experiencing? It's not nothing. You know, the conscious mind, which references largely a sensory map or sensory paradigm, you know, sort of can't address that. But that doesn't mean it's nothing. That the deep sleep experience is every bit as rich as the waking experience. But it's a different kind of richness. It's not a sense. It's what is it? There's no words because the words are oriented towards the sensory, you know, sort of map or paradigm of what happens.
Can you talk something about this engagement
Yes.
Versus effort or even personal effort?
Well, I don't know what you mean by versus, but yeah. Well, engagement is interesting. Engagement is interesting. I don't know how much I can talk about.
Okay, well,
I'm not trying to duck. I'm not trying to duck the issue. Engagement is interesting. Engagement is a lot like presence. It's self-evident. Presence. Engagement is a lot like presence. It's self-evident. It's self-verifying. But you can't say what it is. You can't pin it down. In fact, engagement and presence are essentially the same thing. There's a sense in which experience is felt to be participatory, which likewise is self-evident to the extent that it is, and that likewise can't really be pinned down, can it? And so this whole issue of intentionality or participation or motivation and all of this includes these issues, and these issues are you know, actual but difficult to define, to indicate. Experience feels participatory. You know, this is the feeling that I am experiencing my experience is meaningful. You know, it's not like there's not an entire passivity where it's just and there's stuff happening. But there's a certain element of that too, you know, and it's sort of a continuum, isn't it? I mean, it's not like, you know, some experience is participatory and some experience is just happening. You know, it's sort of a continuum. And presence as a sort of more personally felt presence, like a kind of a more personal engagement versus presence of just experiential presence in the most bare bones sense. Again, I mean, all of this sort of range of qualities, of apparent qualities, are very interesting, and they don't lend themselves into falling apart into clear categories. And ultimately, they are the same thing. You know, they may be a spectrum of the same thing or not, but they're the same thing. You know, the presence of actuality, the presence of experiencing, is ultimately the same as the engagement with experiencing, is ultimately the same as participation with experiencing, is ultimately the same as doing, interacting with experience to the extent that that occurs. They're one and the same. You can't really pull them apart and say this is this and that's that and find the difference between them. But you can't, but things that which seem to be rather different are all actually included in this. You know, like I could say, you know, I could say I feel like I'm moving my hand. There's a very active sense of I'm moving my hand. I can stop it. I can move it. I can stop it. Right? And yet, you know, I'm not. There's not the same sense that I'm putting that Kleenex box appearing in my field of vision as deliberately, as personally, as intentionally. And yet, the Kleenex box appears in the same way as the sight of my hand is appearing, and the sensation of moving is appearing, and even the intentionality of using it, of moving it and using it as an example is appearing. So, you know, so this feels somehow more participatory in an active sense, and this feels less participatory. But is it really, or is it just, you know, a range of the same thing? And you know, these are interesting things to look at.
Well, in terms of effort.
Right. Well, effort's the same thing. So I'm making an effort. I'm lifting this cup. If I didn't make an effort, it would just fall on the floor, right? Is that the kind of effort you're talking about?
Well, sometimes I feel like that I'm trying to do noticing,
Okay.
or let's say
Sure.
when I look into the
Right.
mirror and
Right.
immediately it's opening and it's
Uh-huh.
like everything inclusive,
Right.
and then I will try doing the same experience to see whatever's in front of me instead of facing the mirror. So that is kind of
Right.
intentionally I'm trying.
Sometimes it seems to happen by itself. Sometimes you seem to try to do it and it happens to some
And it
extent.
happens
Sometimes you try and it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah, but
So it's like a
there
range.
is an effort in it. But somehow I felt like it may have some kind of imaginary self. I'm here. I'm making.
Well, it may have an imaginary self. You may be imagining part of that experience may have an imaginary component where you are imagining yourself doing it, and that can be occurring too. I mean, sometimes you'll do something, you know. I mean, like right now, I'm sitting here talking. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do. I'm not planning it. There's no effort into doing it. And yet, in a certain sense, I'm doing it, and so it's an exertion of effort. You know, it's participatory.
Does that reinforce the false identification by trying?
It doesn't necessarily reinforce it, but if there is a false identification there, all that means is that there is an image appearing in imagination that you're identifying with. Like you might just be talking and you're not thinking of yourself talking, you're seeing yourself talking, you're talking very unself-consciously. Or you might see, oh, I'm on the spot, I have to say something, let me see what am I going to do, you know, and all of a sudden you're all nervous, and so it can be very self-conscious kind of talking. But all that self-consciousness is a fantasy projection that's happening in association with the action. It doesn't really have anything to do with the talking.
So would you recommend you look into this illusory sense of self?
Well, just see what's there. It doesn't matter if you're doing it. There's nothing wrong with having fantasy projections, but just see that that's what it is. You don't need to change it. It doesn't matter what you do. You can have all sorts of identifications and projections and neuroses. It doesn't matter what you do. What matters is to see what it is, see what's actually present in your experience. And so, boy, I'm really narcissistic, and I fantasize about myself a lot, and I think about it, and boy, that's just hovering around. Okay, cool. Just see it. You don't need to stop it. Just see it. And when it shows up in its actual perspective of what it actually is, in the reality of your experiential field, it loses independent power. It's just another phenomenon that's there. It has no. It loses its importance. It loses its specialness. So self-image and self-identification and self-ambition, for example. You know, like I want to do better noticing. Okay, here, I'm doing this talk. I really want to do a clear talk. I want to do a meaningful talk. I mean, I could be sitting up here just saying all sorts of horrible, misleading crap, and I wouldn't like that. I don't want to do that. I want to be as clear and useful and clarifying and meaningful as I can in the talk. That's true. I want that. That's a desire that is actively present in my experience. It's a motivation that's present. And it's present to a degree as a personality projection. It's present in that I see myself as I would like to be helpful. I would like to be beneficial to people. I would like to make information that I consider supremely valuable. I would like to be able to convey it effectively to people and to convey its value to people too. I want that. So that's there. But it's there. But it's nothing. It's just, that's part of what's there. Motivation is there if it's there. And then it's not an issue. It's not a separate thing. It has no autonomy. It's just an aspect of this energy system being what it is.
When the talk is done, and that has gone too.
Of course.
When the talk is finished,
Sure.
that image, that.
Of course. You're thinking of yourself, you really want to try to be noticing, and you're trying, and you're efforting, you know? But then that's gone, and you get distracted, and you're doing something else, and you're at work, and you're trying to do a job or something, and then that's there. But that's the way the dynamism of the energy system moves itself. You know, and it can feel more of a person, of what seems to be personality elements, or it can feel like it's more just impersonal event, and so on and so forth. But it's all actually the same information appearing in the way that it does in the experiential field.
I think what we're talking about is, well, is my actual experience is that I am integrally connected with this body.
Sure.
Just this body.
Sure.
It is. I mean, it doesn't seem natural. It doesn't seem fantasy or anything.
Sure.
That's the most. It's really a basic fundamental experience. It's self-evident, or I can't change. I can't be someone else's body or anything like that. I can kind of pretend that I'm. Well, not pretend. I can actually be part of a larger group or the whole universe. I'm still with this body and this,
right.
You know, this experience. So I thought that's kind of what we're talking about here. Sometimes when I hear you talking, it doesn't sound like the body and the experience are one and the same thing.
Well, they're very much one and the same thing, but the experience, like in this example, the experience of the body is not a simple unity. It's a complex, multidimensional actuality. For example, you see your body just like you see my body. You see your hand and you see my hand, and they aren't. You see them exactly the same way. You seeing your hand has no more privilege than you seeing the floor in front of your feet. On the other hand, you're feeling your hand, and you can't feel my hand from over here. So that's a different relationship. But so the sense of touch, the body appears a certain way in the sense of touch. The body appears a different way in the sense of vision. You know, the body appears a different way in let's say conceptually, and it may appear a different way in terms of, you know, emotional projections and self-image stuff, and I mean, who knows what. So there's this complex association of you know, information that's present in different dimensions, in different, well, in this case, in different sense fields, let's say. That actually has different properties in each area. And, you know, we usually say, well, it's my body and I'm associated to it. That's sort of taking that whole complexity and just lumping it as a simple unity. And I don't think it actually exists as that simple unity. It actually exists as the presence of all of these elements that constitute it. I mean, I'm not contradicting you, absolutely.
I agree with what you said. It is different from anything else that I encountered. But and I understand, you know, it does get integrated somewhere. So I experience it more unitary. I mean, I can break it down into more parts, but if I don't break it down, it's more unitary.
Well, experience essentially appears as a field, so it appears as essentially a unitary phenomena, but the nature of this unitary phenomena is subtle and complex, which has all these different ranges of sort of information content and densities and dimensions and so on, that, you know, like just in the course of this conversation, talking about, like, for example, sense fields and so on and so forth. So it's sort of both and. You know, it is a whole, but it's a complex and subtle and interesting multidimensional whole. It's not just a dull blob.
Let me introduce one extra element here, which is that everything that I experience, including things outside of my body, do require certain neural antagonists, or the neurology of the brain is all the experience. That's all there too. But I also know that because of the way we are created and wired, we're also prone to easy distortion. And not just the conceptual stuff that we make up as we go along, even some of the more basic visual things where we're prone to fall for optical illusions and stuff. Sure. Which we counter by, if you know what the magicians do, you know, it does help to so if you don't, if someone presents you, which line is longer by way it's not an illusion, you'll reverse your answer.
Right. And that's really what we're talking about here, is paying attention to what the magician's doing rather than just gullibly buying the trick, hook, line, and sinker in the way it's being presented. Look, I'm pulling a rabbit out of the hat. The rabbit was already in the hat.
I know that it could possibly be true, but if I go by my experience, I have to say, well, this guy can make cars disappear.
Right.
But that's the, you know, I guess it's a big deal to say.
We're talking about the same thing.
Kind of doubt your experience.
Yeah. Well, you can look at the mechanism. I mean, basically, the gist of what I present is looking at the mechanism of experience, and you can understand more about how you experience what you experience, analogously to, if you understand the magic trick, you understand more about how you're experiencing, or you understand, you know, the optical illusion, you understand more about your experiencing than just a simple naive, you know, taking it gullibly at face value.
It's that, I mean, I get that information. I don't experience it, unless you want to count that as part of the experience. So, as I wind into this, there's It's a sense of taking away something. It's a sense of how do I make this system what I consider the concept, my system, my life. Do I take this valuable retreat? What kind of mechanism do I take that I can then, sorry, I'm trying to force it on experience. I'm going to force experience to allow me to continue the concept that I have of me, and yet experience has to follow this concept. What's happening is I have to remove this. What happens is the concept of me, my body, is being chiseled away. It's becoming less my body. It's like, when did I build it? When did I put this thing together? When did I did it? I was given, here's your body. Here's the filter that I want to see myself through. And go ahead. Well, it doesn't make sense. No, shut up. Just keep going. Because the stuff's just going to keep coming at what you perceive as you. Sure. So, yeah, have fun with trying to move it all around, and that's all cool too. But you're never going to make sense of what the end game is, or how you're going to move this thing around. It's going to be moved around.
Right.
And experience is going to show up, and that's all I care about.
Sure. Absolutely.
Is experience. So go ahead, you can claim anything you want, but I'm behind you going, wow. And right, so this thing keeps creeping back up insidiously, thinking, oh, I'm going to take something, I'm going to be Henry still for the rest of my life. No, I'm going to be Henry, I'm going to control the universe. Forget it. You can't have to. So it's a tricky point in the value for me of this thing. The value is only evident. It appears when this thing, the notion, the concept I have, this, just not by doing anything except the noticing seems to disintegrate.
Sure.
The noticeable.
Sure. Well, it disintegrates a naive, gullible, superficial, sloppy understanding, and you get a more nuanced, sensitive, informed perception of what's actually there.
But I'm not getting it, it's just showing up.
Well, whatever. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Sure. I mean, that's the nice thing about noticing. You don't have to actually do anything. It's already there.
As soon as I start doing something, it's, oh, I'll forget it. The camera, like the shutter closes. Yeah.
Yeah. But you kind of get your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
You get to be Henry, and ultimately you do get to control the universe.
There's a sense of taking place. There's a sense of, that crazy sense that we usually get in the store. We get it from religion. We get these tools that we go and now form. Now we can continue doing the same thing we were with a pill. You can just take this pill and you can continue running yourself into the ground, but you'll take a pill that will make you forget that you're running yourself into the ground. And that's what one expects from things like this, just to go the opposite. It's like, you're not running yourself into the ground every day.
I love your diatribes.
That's somebody. Please play that back to me at some point. I'm stuck in my office freaking out about my taxes. They're tests where they try to just, I don't know what they sound like.
I was thinking we were talking about my mom. There's some, I know they've done some more recent psychological studies where they've actually changed people's location where they think they are like 3 feet behind. Sure. You can dislocate yourself, feeling yourself being somewhere else. Sure. The other thing I think with the body is that, and I want to actually come to value, it's so symbiotic with the environment, the breathing, eating food, and then, but even that's sort of the gross level, but even just like we talk about the fullness of the senses, or that your space, and that's what defines this. So space is kind of just as much this, it's this, so that it becomes more I guess the fullness becomes more, or it's sort of intuitive, it's kind of like
body.
I mean, you find the demarcation between body and space and all these other things is really kind of an artificiality. It's kind of conceptual. Experientially, it all comes with. So,
I remember when I met my wife for her birthday, we did a deprivation tank, which I think some other people do.
you know how to show a girl a good time. It's always got such a deprivation.
I would think when you're dark room, by yourself. But what was kind of cool is that the sensation could conform with the form. I mean, I did, you know what I mean? So you have my hands on it somewhere where this would support this thing as opposed to like a 5 meters. Sure, where it is in the end and all that stuff.
Yeah, that kind of thing is a great experiment. It shows you how, you know, essentially arbitrary the orientation of sensation to imagined form is, and how much of it is imagined. It's held together. It's the glue that holds the body together is fantasy, basically.
Is it imagined or, I mean, that's a different situation. You've got unique, well, in this case, environment, interacting with your body,
right,
producing a different sensation. So
right.
It's not imaginary. It's imaginary if you think you're still in air, you know, whatever it's in the basketball. You know, there less gravity is not imaginary.
Well, it's not that it's imaginary per se. It's that a great deal of the way we orient to our body as being is held together by mental components. And if you change those mental components, the way it seems to be can seem to be very different. For example, you know, feeling your body and seeing your body at the same time ultimately gives a different sort of a sense of what it is than just feeling it without seeing it. For example, the sensory deprivation tank, or seeing it without feeling it. Like if you were somehow, I'm speculating here and probably extrapolating from arbitrary experiences, but if you were somehow completely numb and you watched your fingers touching each other and you couldn't feel it would have a different, you know, sort of a gestalt feeling of what that was like than when you're seeing it and feeling it together. So that, which is essentially a mental component that's holding it together.
And you have to kind of think your way through that, just like when they do robotic surgery, for example. You know, it's not simply no surgery because your hands aren't touching.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different orientation.
Right. Which I mean, you learn.
But the robot feels different because you're not feeling it. If you had no sensation in your hand would essentially become like a robot. And your experience of manipulating your hand to the extent you could might be very similar to your experience of running a robot through Waldo's or something, or no control. Because you'd see the thing, you know, if my hand was completely numb and I wanted to pick up the glass, but I still had motor control, but I couldn't feel it, I'd have to watch carefully and, you know.
So the interesting is how do you get to that process? Because the trouble is if you just go with experience, you're probably going to keep being disoriented.
Yeah,
you almost
experience.
have to figure out, okay, I get it. So if I do this or have this whatever, it moves that way, even though it doesn't make any sense to me. You almost have to think it through rather than experience it through.
Well, but that shows that relating to experience has an enormous mental component, has an enormous component of conceptualization and visualization and so on and so forth. You know, which is really the point. You know, if you aren't in a position where you have to be forced to discover that, you might not realize that's the case. And in fact, the way you run your body now, which seems so intuitive and obvious and immediate, you had to learn to do. When you were a toddler, you didn't know. You know, you're a baby, you're going like this. You don't know you can control your hand. You discover how to control your hand very much the way I imagine you might learn to control, you know, a robot extension or something. But we forget because we don't remember that, so we just think, I've always done this. I know how to run my body, and I've always, it's just with that that level of engagement with it, without recalling the process of coming to it and seeing how artificial it is in a certain sense.
So, so you were kind of demonstrating this earlier when you're hitting the chair. I mean, I experienced my body as having a clear boundary, and yet, like, I know scientifically I don't have a clear boundary here.
Well, when you say clear, what do you mean? If you look at your, say my finger has an edge, look very, very closely at the edge. It's fuzzy. It's not sharp. Look through a microscope, and it's still fuzzy. It's not sharp, right? And then sensation. Okay, my body has a sharp edge. Does it really? Close your eyes, and feel how sharply edged your hand is. Your hand is this cloud of amazing vital tingles. Is it really that sharp and cut and dried? I mean, the visual information sort of collapses. When I feel my hand and I see my hand at the same time, the vision is relatively sharp, and so the sort of fuzziness of the sense information. I mean, like, say you're making love to someone in the dark, and you're touching each other, and I mean, it can get really kind of cloudy and kind of interestingly, not vague necessarily, but not really clearly demarcated in some ways. Whereas if you're seeing what's happening, all of a sudden that puts it in a different perspective.
And so sometimes in those situations with love or making love or whatever, that there's like this kind of loosening of the boundary.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
So, and then some people apparently can get like really merged. Is that just an amplification of the same thing? Or is that something else? Or is it,
I don't know, find out. Check it out.
Doesn't seem to be particular talent.
You are merged with your experience completely. You are already completely merged with everything. Everything you're seeing, it is in your experience. It's not out there somewhere you need to sort of go to it. In fact, it's in you. And your sense of touch is in you and all of that. So,
even though they say that I'm not merged, I am.
Well, merged with what? You are merged with the experiential field. The experiential field is merged with itself. It's a continuum that includes itself. And it's a full-on engagement. You would not be experiencing something if it wasn't in your experience. And think about it. When you see the sun is appearing in your field of vision. It's not like your field of vision somehow goes out and the sun's out there somewhere and it somehow sends out a little baby and touches the sun. Oh, no, I haven't seen the sun. Right?
Right.
So so right now you're merged. Everything that's showing up in your field of vision, you're merged with it. It's in you, or you wouldn't be seeing it. And the same, of course, any of the sense fields as well as any other energy presence.
Well, I mean, because earlier you were talking about, I think it was very, here's my hand and you can see my hand, but you can only feel your own hand.
Right.
So that particular field doesn't necessarily feel the same kind of merging unless you're actually.
Well, it's complex. It's subtle. It's not simple. Kind of right. Feel me. What do I feel like? Just whatever. Don't worry about what that means. Just do it. And take someone else and feel them. What do they feel like? They feel different. You can call this reading auras if you like. I mean, people have a certain flavor that's palpable. How are you doing it? I don't know. You get a hit on people. You walk into a room and you meet someone, you see someone you've never met, and you know what you think about them already. You already like them or not, just by the energy flavor or whatever. What's up with that? I mean, that's a kind of a move. What is this sense of touch? You can't. Why bother to categorize? Yeah, but that's an overlay of categories and concepts. The experiential field isn't like that. It's a rich lusciousness. It's just it's here. It's full on.
I feel like kind of what I'm really saying, at little bit, it's like I don't know if it makes sense, but like when you were saying you show up for your talk, you can act with full intention that you want to be clear, but you might have concepts of what clear look like, but you don't really know, it's kind of like show me what clear is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's complex. There may or may not be intention, there may or may not be concepts, there may or may not be talking, all of these things may or may not be present if they are. And if they're, if I say I really want to do a good job at this talk, what I'm saying is I'm experiencing the presence of a quality, experiential quality, an energy, let's say, that I'm labeling as being that. So it's something it's something appearing in my experience. I know it's there because I feel it, or whatever, right? The same way I know anything's in my experience, I feel it. All experience is felt. When, we have all of these verbs for different qualities of experience, and they all are euphemisms for feel. Say, I see light. But the seeing is a euphemism for feeling light. You feel the presence of light in your experience. Consciousness feels light. Consciousness feels sound. Consciousness feels sensation. Consciousness feels thought. These things are experientially palpable. They are textural presences of experience. And in fact, the textures are very obvious, which is how we distinguish them. You can instantly tell between sound and sight. You hear a sound, you don't think you've seen something. You might if you're experiencing a little synesthesia or something. But typically, it's really obvious when the difference between sound and sight. Why? They have different textures. The energy presence of sound in consciousness has a different texture than the energy presence of light. Now, you can't maybe define or delineate exactly what that difference is, but you can feel it. It is. It's a no-brainer. You don't need to sit and try to figure it out. It's just completely obvious. You can tell touch. You can tell the difference between touch and sound. Someone sticks you with a pin. You don't say, "Shut up! It's too loud." Ow! And conversely, someone's, you hear a loud noise, you say, "Shut up." You don't say, "Ow." Whatever. But the point is that, these experiential textures are felt intimately in consciousness. We have a way of looking at that with all this mechanism, we suppose. The eye sees light and the ear hears sound and all of this elaboration. But in actual fact, the consciousness is what? The experiencing of the energy, which happens in experience, not in some body part. You don't even know the body part's there unless it's in your experience. So experience is felt. It's a felt engagement. It's an absolute intimate engagement. When you see light, the light is being absolutely intimately engaged with. It's a present texture, a present experiential texture, right? And the same with sound, and anything you want to classify. I'm sorry? Well, it's the same thing. When you're thinking, how do you know you're thinking?
Well, there's thinking based on sensory experience, and then there's thinking.
Well, but you don't need to classify it as sensory or not sensory. You don't need to orient to a body. If you orient to experience, thought is an experiential presence. You know you're thinking because something is present that you recognize or you designate as that thought. You know thought is present because something is present that you're calling thought. Just like vision is present because something is present that you're calling light. Thought is a texture. You're thinking because there's an eventful, a dynamic eventfulness that is actually experienced in the dimension of experience that we call the mind, let's say, or whatever. Just like, how do you know you're seeing? You're seeing if there is a direct experience in the presence of the quality of experience you call light. Right? And then having theories about whether or not it's physical, whether or not it's sensory, whether or not it's this, that, or the other, is all, that's sort of spin doctoring after the fact. It may or may not be true, and it may or may not be relevant, but the immediate fact is the experience itself. And then the explanation follows. You know, long before you knew that you had a body and there was an external world, you had experience. You know, when you're a newborn, there's this experience full on, wow, you know, wide open. You don't know that, oh, the world's out there, my body's over here, and my sense organs are perceiving this. And you don't know that. That's a lot of theory that is basically rationalization. I mean, it may or may not have some relevance, and it may or may not be true, but it's basically abstraction overlaid over the raw fact of the presence of experiential field, which is, you know, absolutely intimate and undeniable.
Going back to, I think that, I'm not sure if this is the point Francine was making, but this is what I was hearing, was that, like, we have these intentions, like you have an intention to come in and, and give a talk that's clear and that people have benefit from that. And what happens between intentions and then what happens, you know?
Why is there a between?
Pardon?
Why is there a between or a relationship?
Well, you know, it's like,
If there's an if I say I have an intention, that means there's a presence of something that I've designated that. What's it have to do with what happens or not?
So you,
The theory that intention shows up or has emerged in relation to action is again just a theory.
so you feel it first, and then you kind of go, oh, this is.
Well, maybe you feel it first, maybe you feel it after, maybe whatever, maybe you don't feel it at all. But the point is, if you experience it, that means you're feeling it. So if I feel an intention, then I'm experiencing some quality that I'm designating by that. You know, I may feel like, what's a motivation feel like? I don't know, but it's obvious. It feels like a motivation.
Well, there's a lot to engage with that in some way in terms of experimentation.
Absolutely. All this stuff can be engaged with.
Just awareness, like, okay, trip out on that for a day and see what, you know, what comes up.
Always, I mean, like I started with tonight, always look and see what you're referring to actually is about as an experiential present. So I say, oh, I have an intention. It's like, okay, what do I mean by that? I mean that there is some sense of a presence of some flavor that I'm using that word and that notion to indicate. You know, so it's some experiential actuality. You know, if it wasn't, then I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't be feeling it.
I guess my question comes up is along the lines of being more effective. Like, you know, when you have like a desire arise and you want to make something happen, how do you get integrated enough that
well, you may or may not have sufficient talent or skillfulness in a particular area to do that at times or not. And that's down to, you know, I want to give a good concert on piano. How do I do it? Well, I better learn to play piano. I better have some talent. I better have some skill. I better be able to get out of my own way in terms of stage fright and things. And if I can do that occasionally, then I may be able to actually actualize that intention or desire. I may have the desire and I can't actualize it.
Yeah.
I would really love to be a great concert pianist, but I can't play a fucking note. I mean, I push down on the key and nothing happens. You know, I mean, how does effectiveness come about? Effectiveness comes about by having an arbitrary configuration of sufficient qualities to make effectiveness happen. How does a person become a good speaker? Well, you know, you have to have a coming together of elements that end up enacting that. And for everyone, that's going to be unique.
When you were saying that the thing about the sun being in my experience as opposed to it being out there, sitting out there. You know, when I mean, I'm experiencing that, when I actually notice that that's the case, it's literally like a magic eye, where, you know, conflict, I can't control it sometimes. Like some, well, obviously, like everybody knows my experience right now. And they actually not make that into a work game, and actually do that. That requires that.
Yeah.
And it's I think I don't know if I'm working against habit or what it is that keeps it.
Well, what you're talking about is what we touched on earlier a few times in previous days, is this peculiar auto-suggestive nature of consciousness that when it holds a notion of things being a certain way, it tries to actualize that and experience it in the feeling tone as if that was the case. And much of what we hold as normalcy in terms of orientation of things is actually this kind of hypnotic simulation. And when you successfully, or whether successfully or not, when you reorient one of these auto-hypnotic positionings or orientations, it's palpable, because the very effect of the suggestion is to make it is to create a feeling of simulation, a feeling that it is that. You know, I mean, those of you that lucid dream or that have experienced lucid dreams, this is very palpable. The feeling of being lost in a dream and being in like an objective world, like most people would be in this world, feels very, very different from, oh my God, I'm dreaming. Wow, this is all a dream. All of a sudden, whoop, everything. I mean, it's a real palpable shift in terms of the feeling tone of the event. Nothing changes in terms of what's being experienced, maybe. I mean, you know, if you're seeing something in a dream, you still, you know, when you're not lucid and you go lucid, you may still be seeing that context, but the sense of it and the feeling of it is drastic. This is all in me. Wow, you know, cool. You know, doesn't matter what I do. It's a dream. You know, I mean, what a difference from, you know, I'm in a dream and I'm in this shitty situation, I have to cope with it, and I'm, you know, probably doing a mediocre job as usual, and, you know, and I got to keep on working with it, and the obligation and necessity, I mean, all of this stuff, right? It's a whole different feeling to it. And of course, the auto-suggestive mechanism is totally active in the dream consciousness, and so it creates the feeling that that is the case. And it feels like it's a real world, and it feels like it matters, and it feels like there's urgency and all that. But all of a sudden you see it's a dream, and all that goes, ship. Nothing's actually changed, but this auto-suggestive orientation, which feels so different. And the same thing is in effect with what this feels like. The waking state, you know, as most people know it, is largely a production of their own auto-hypnosis. What it feels like, I'm saying. Yeah.
Getting back to reality, the dreaming where anything goes. I mean, here's what they teach, I think, in whatever grade, that the sun is 93 billion miles away.
Right.
You have to kind of say, well, okay, which one corresponds better to all the other information available in reality? So it's the same thing what you were saying with, you have to be realistic about your talents, abilities. You can't stretch your imagination too far. It's either there or it isn't a lot of times.
Yes, I agree with there or isn't, which is a function of experience. But the sun being 93 million miles away is a theory. The notion that space it has extension is a theory. You know, in fact, quantum mechanics, the quantum physicists may say there's zero distance between this electron right here and some photon in the sun because they're quantum entangled. You know, you can't wrap your head around that. No, the sun's out there and then this electron's over here. But the physicists would say, no, you're wrong. The old ideas of space aren't real. Space isn't really space. Space is an artifact of measurement, and if you measure it differently, you get a totally different reading. For example,
it's better than it's right there. Reach out and touch it. The sun, through physics is better ideas than most of us can come up with without physics, without the knowledge that physicists have.
Sure, but physics itself is continually revising itself, and continually the old version, you know, the old version that things are a certain way. You know, the Earth was once flat, and now you laugh at someone says the Earth's flat. You know, but you're a dinosaur. Get real, the Earth is round. You know, but sooner or later, then a quantum physicist comes along and says the Earth isn't even really here. You know, it's a cloud of probabilities. What is a cloud of probabilities? This is a cloud of probabilities. If a physicist would say yes, in fact it is. It shows up like that in experience because of the nature of the quantum interactions and so on, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, but see, that's all theory. And then in 2,000 years, the theories of the physicists then, they're going to look on what the quantum physicists are saying now and say, this guy just thought the Earth was flat.
Presumably because they'll be able to get closer to, you know, something, consistent.
Well, the scientific conceit is you get closer, and you're actually getting closer to something that is actually a certain way. But suppose you get closer, and then you get closer than that, you get closer than that, and closer than that, it keeps being different and different and different and different, and you never actually get anywhere but more difference, and the next theory is more difference, and the next theory is more difference. I mean, the notion that there's a final result is itself a theory. Science has never verified that. On the contrary, but science continually verifies this.
I don't even know these people that look at the theory of everything. They believe that there's a theory of everything. It just, you know, gives them the right for this job.
But the whole question of, you know, what do you use as a touchstone of accuracy? What I'm suggesting, the whole basic bent of this presentation is that experience is the touchstone of actuality. And theory has been abstracted out of experience. People think the sun is 93 million miles away because of experience, not the other way around. The sun wasn't 93 million miles away and then experience occurred. Experience happened. They noticed that there seems to be this thing called the sun. They noticed there seems to be this property called measurement, and they noticed you could do this and that. All of that follows on experience, not the other way around.
Well, I agree with that. It's like that's done. I'll take their experience.
No, by all means.
It's like, so my experience is to take their experience. Because
oh, sure.
They didn't.
Sure. Yeah, but there's lots of thems whose experience you can take, and it's in a lot of that is in wildly different orientations and fields and implications. You know, you can go to physical scientists, or you can go to psychologists, or you can go to metaphysicians, or you can go to so-and-sos, and there's all these different theories and different, you know, perspectives, and you're welcome to buy any of them. They're all available.
Thinking about, like, you know, that stars are actually, the stars that we see shining are actually no longer there, you know, because of the speed of light and all that. But it's in our experience, because if we're seeing it, it doesn't really matter whether it exploded 7 years ago or not. The stars.
So those are abstractions. The actuality, the only actuality is experience.
So in my experience, I see the stars and they're twinkling, and so they're there.
Maybe they're there because you're experiencing it.
Yeah,
maybe you're dreaming. Maybe you're seeing stars and you're experiencing, and you're twinkling, and you're reading physics books, and you're noticing that the stars died billions of years ago, and the entire thing's happening in a dream. So when did that happen?
So, I just part of what's happening for me, I guess, for the retreat is at times there's less of a sense of me. And I'm wondering if one gets to the point where they, with significantly less sense of me, where they don't actually care what happens to them. Where there's, you know what I mean, where it's like this is happening, and thus, and this is as much everything that happens is radiant presence. So does one get to a point where one doesn't have any stake in what happens to them?
I suppose that's possible, but my experience is that the sense of me becomes more and more arbitrary. it becomes a matter of a sort of a preferred or an accidental orientation within experience. Typically, naively, ignorance, some sorry point of view, or what have you. There's a profound identification with the self and with the body, and with I am the doer, and I'm this, and I'm Peter Brown, and I'm doing everything, and so on and so forth. But as one becomes more subtle in being with the spiritual field of nature, one discovers that this identification is kind of arbitrary and fluid and slippery, and one discovers that in fact the identity is mobile and moves and can move to a great degree within the experiential field. It's possible to totally not identify with the body and be identified with something else, be distracted, be in a book or with a project or psychologically in some sense, what have you. And there's no limit to the extent to which this can occur. So the sense of self is a locked-in, done deal that you're stuck with. Definitely dissipates. Whether or not it ultimately becomes, not caring at all. I mean, in a certain sense, we can speculate that it does. I mean, if you say ultimately is on the deathbed, like a nanosecond after you die, or when you're sound asleep, or you're anesthetized.
Right.
I mean, that's why surgeons use anesthesia, because you don't complain. You don't even want it. It's not just that you can't complain, you don't even know there's anything to complain about. So that's not so far-fetched.
Peter, I don't understand what you said about arbitrary in this instance. Is there any-
Identification is fluid. I may really be feeling, let's say I walk into a social situation with a lot of people that I don't know, and I'm feeling self-conscious, and I'm, having a sort of personality anxiety about how people are going to take me, and I want to put my best foot forward, whatever, it's personality stuff. So I might be very self-conscious and really, oh, this is me, I'm here. Or let's say I'm lost in a great book. How much of this is me and I'm here is there? There's much that's been dialed way back, so to speak, and the emphasis is on identifying with the plot, with the characters, with the situation, or you're doing a project. You're really, I don't know if you're doing some very intricate project that requires a lot of attention and all that. How aware are you of yourself and what other people are thinking of you, for example, or what have you? In terms of self-consciousness.
So it's circumstance-based.
Well, it may or may not be oriented to circumstance, but it's certainly fluid. It may be oriented to psychology. It may not be a matter of strictly of circumstance. You may be able to not change the circumstance and still change your orientation. And through things like imagination or autosuggestion. I can pretend I'm floating up by that light in the ceiling, and I can kind of feel like I am. And at that point, I feel much less like I'm sitting here. So that's very contrived and constructed, and yet because of this autosuggestive nature of consciousness, consciousness has a very obliging tendency to try to make whatever suggestion it has, whatever notion it's orienting around, feel as if that was the case. And much of identification is that kind of a mechanism. So it's much more fluid and flexible than one may notice.
So I keep trying to tell experience what it is.
Good luck with that. Yeah. Well, that's a normal human mode.
Bloody retreat. That there's a follow-up. I merely follow
Of course.
it. But then as soon as I follow it, I turn around and I start trying to tell it what it is. It's insane.
It is. Humans are insane. It's human nature. The mind doesn't do what you want it to. The mind doesn't do what you think it ought to do.
And I call it mine.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah. For sure, because it feels like it feels like my eyes. But for sure, I'm following what they're seeing. I'm following my thoughts. I'm following the experience. And yet I keep trying to tell the experience to a certain extent. I want control of the experience because it feels like it's mine.
But this is human nature. This is human diversity. You know, we want to try to run things and control things, and you know, be all you can, label everything, run everything. But even when that's happening, that's not all that's happening. That's happening in a context of actual experience, much of which is not that. So that's just sort of this perverse, psychotic, mental, you know, spin doctoring. But that's going on here. But all the rest of the experiential field is going on where it's going on, and it's doing what it's doing. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that.
When we have meditations today, the animal dissolves, and not even because I want it to dissolve, just dissolve because it's just, there's nothing going on. Anyway, this other, these thoughts dance around. Sure, brace them, not even knowing how to brace them. Go before, and it's some time later, I realized, oh my God, I've been with my son in this room.
Yeah.
And you know, if the mirage touched me, I go, oh, I can. But no, I go, there's the camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
You did.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the experience can look like anything. It's wildly flexible. You know, it's easy to have a naive notion that there's an objective reality and you're experiencing it and you're stuck with it. But in actual fact, you're tripping all over the place. You know, you're just like zooming here and zooming there and fantasizing about that and remembering that and getting lost in that.
For that not to be the case.
Yeah, probably struggling with it and hating yourself, self-loathing because you're this way or that way. And I mean, the whole thing, you know, it's just this infinite complexity of interrelationship.
I don't think I ever heard you use the word human nature before, but is human nature or spin doctrine or any of that, is that just like an interpretive mode? I mean, it's just part of
what it actually
experience. I mean, it's
what it actually is an unanalyzable actuality.
right.
You know, we say the mind does what it does, you know, but even defining it as the mind and defining it as doing is you know, total fabrication. You know, all you know is there's all of this amazing experience that seems to have dynamism and seems to have all this dimensional flavors, and some of it's qualified as the mind spinning around or being crazy or whatever. Some of it's qualifiable as, you know, obsession with the personality and narcissism. Some of it's qualifiable as sensory experience. And so you can qualify these things arbitrarily, but the actuality is they don't have labels on them. They don't say that they're. The mind doesn't have a label saying, a sign on it saying, I'm the mind.
Yeah.
You know, we're telling it it's the mind. It's just this weird flavor of experiential
so some of those terms and some of the language we're trying to talk about this, it's just, you're right, it was arbitrary.
But not just the language, but
the actual record.
The structure. You know, there's the mind, and the mind is different than the senses. Why? Because the word mind is different than the word senses. Is the actual mind really different than the actual senses? I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. But you know, we're conditioned by the structure, the semantic structure of the symbol systems we use. It's a bias that is insidious and ubiquitous.
Well, you know, I sort of like this one writer, Charles Fort, right?
Yeah.
You know, just everything is singular. Everything's, you know, just,
Yeah.
you know, there is no pattern. You know, there is really no pattern.
Yeah, exactly. And language completely queers that.
Right.
Because there's only so many words and we reuse them for different phenomena.
Yeah.
You know, this is a thought and that's a thought and that's a thought and that's a thought. No, this is this thought, that is that thought. Just because you use the same word, thought, for it doesn't make it the same thing. But the implicit bias, the implicit logic of a semantic system makes it suppose that the categories and the symbols you're using refers to an actual existential categories of the things you're using it to refer to, and it may not be the case. You expect reality to conform to the symbol, to the structure of the symbols you're using to refer to it, is a fallacy, and it's a banana peel that is going to take your ass down if you're doing it relevant. Like most people do. Take your ass down. Speaking of take your ass down, why don't we knock off for tonight and take our asses down to bed? Wait, okay.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night,
Yeah, I know.
under the lights.
Yeah, I'll put it up. Everybody bring snacks.
Bring snacks.
So tomorrow night is the wrap party.
At the cafeteria tomorrow after this talk.
Tomorrow night after the evening session, there'll be a wide document and bash, or it may be a complete boring sewing circle. Who knows?